For 8 years, Hanson touched his ear. Every specialist said the same thing: permanent, incurable, accepted. His father Roman spent millions, London, Boston, specialists who charge more per consultation than most people earn in a year. Brain scans, gene therapy trials, experimental implants. All of them delivered the same verdict: your son will never hear. But Roman couldn't accept it, because Hanson was only 8 years old, and Roman had already failed him once. The boy's mother died in childbirth, and Roman swore he'd give his son everything money could buy. Everything except the one thing Hanson needed most. What Roman didn't know, the answer wasn't in a research hospital. It was standing in his hallway, holding a mop. Joel Smith was a janitor. No medical degree, no credentials. Just a man trying to keep his head down and his paycheck steady in a house where invisible labor was the only kind allowed. But Joel noticed something about Hanson that every six-figure specialist had missed. Something dark lodged deep inside the boy's ear. Something that didn't belong. And one afternoon, while Roman was locked in another conference call, Joel made a choice that would either save Hanson's life or cost Joel his freedom. What happened next will leave you speechless. Before we continue, hit subscribe, like this video, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I believe this story found you for a reason. The Clark estate sat on the hill like a museum exhibit. Glass, marble, and manicured stone arranged so precisely it felt rude to breathe too hard near it. Workers arrived before dawn to erase every fingerprint, trim every stray leaf, polish every surface, until the whole place looked more computer-generated than lived in. Nothing was out of place. Nothing was allowed to be. Inside, the air was softer, colder. Hallways swallowed footsteps. Doors hissed shut instead of slamming. Even the grandfather clock in the foyer had its chimes disabled. The polished brass pendulum swung in perfect silence, counting seconds no one heard. Silence was Roman Clark's first rule. Staff texted instead of speaking. Shoes were rubber-soled. Music was banned from communal spaces. Televisions kept on mute with subtitles only. The house ran on gestures and glances, on the faint swish of fabric and the sigh of air conditioning. To a visitor, it was impressive. To anyone who stayed long enough, it began to feel like a funeral that never ended. At the center of it all was Hanson. 8 years old, small for his age, he moved through the mansion like a ghost that hadn't decided whether it was allowed to haunt. Tutors came and went with folders and hopeful smiles, signing carefully, exaggerating their mouthing so he could read lips if he wanted. Most days he didn't. He watched their faces, then drifted away, retreating into rooms where even expressions stopped trying. He had his own wing, a bedroom with custom acoustic panels, a playroom full of untouched toys, a private garden where the wind bent the trees without making a sound. Cameras watched him, nannies rotated. No one raised their voice at him. No one raised their voice at all. Roman told himself it was kindness. If Hanson's world was silent, then the house should match it. No sharp noises to startle him. No sudden laughter to remind him of the things he couldn't hear. Roman commissioned double glazing, extra insulation, soft close everything. He spent money the way other people exhaled. Grief did not soften him. It hardened into rules, into policies, into contracts that required discretion and compliance. The quieter the house became, the more control Roman felt he had. And still, every so often, he would catch sight of his son in a reflection or a monitor. Hanson, alone in a perfect soundless room, and something in Roman's chest would twist like he'd built a palace around a wound and called it home. Joel Smith arrived at the Clark estate every morning at 5:30, parked his decade-old sedan behind the service entrance, and clocked in before the sun decided whether it was worth showing up. He wore gray uniforms that blended into walls, moved through rooms like he was part of the ventilation system, and had perfected the art of being present without being noticed. That was the job. Not just cleaning, vanishing. He'd worked a dozen estates before this one, each with its own flavor of wealth and neurosis. Some wanted staff in matching outfits like living dolls. Others wanted you gone by noon, as if the house cleaned itself by magic. The Clark estate was different. Here, silence wasn't preference. It was doctrine. Joel learned fast. No humming, no radio, no small talk with the other staff. You communicated in nods and texts. You existed in the gaps between their lives. Joel didn't mind. Invisible paid the bills, and bills were all that mattered. He had his own debts, his own late notices stacking up, his own reasons to keep his head down and his mouth shut. This wasn't the kind of job where you asked questions or made suggestions. You scrubbed, you repaired, you disappeared. He fixed the things no one else noticed were broken. A drawer that stuck, a baseboard pulling away from the wall, a loose hinge on a cabinet door in the third-floor linen closet that probably hadn't been opened in a year. Joel's toolkit was always with him, compact, organized, ready. He prided himself on being the guy who solved problems before anyone realized they existed. That's why he noticed the boy. Hanson appeared sometimes in doorways, watching Joel work with the kind of stillness that felt practiced. The kid never made noise, never interrupted. He'd just stand there, hands loose at his sides, eyes tracking Joel's movements like he was studying a documentary. Joel would nod. Hanson would nod back. Then the boy would drift away. But over the weeks, Joel started noticing something else. A habit. A tic, maybe. Hanson would touch his right ear, not scratching, not casual. He'd press his palm flat against it, hold it there for a few seconds, then pull his hand away and glance at his fingers like he expected to see something. His face would tighten, just for a moment. Then the blankness would return. It happened often enough that Joel started watching for it, and once he started watching, he couldn't stop. It was a Tuesday when Joel found Hanson curled up in the library alcove, knees pulled to his chest, face buried in his arms. The boy's shoulders were shaking, not with sobs, because sound wasn't something Hanson made, but with the kind of silent crying that looked like it hurt more for being trapped inside. Joel froze in the doorway, mop bucket in hand. Every instinct told him to back out quietly, pretend he hadn't seen anything. Staff didn't interact with Hanson beyond basic safety. Roman's rules were clear. The boy was fragile, off limits, not your concern. But Hanson's hand was pressed so hard against his right ear that his knuckles had gone white. Joel set the bucket down carefully and moved closer. Not too close, just enough to be in the boy's line of sight if he looked up. Hanson didn't. His eyes were squeezed shut, his whole body tense with whatever pain he was trying to contain. Tears slid down his cheeks in steady tracks. Joel crouched. Hanson's eyes opened, red-rimmed, exhausted, and for a second there was panic. Then recognition. Then something worse. Resignation, like he'd been caught doing something shameful. Joel pointed gently at Hanson's ear, then made a questioning face, eyebrows raised. "Does it hurt?" Hanson hesitated, then nodded. Joel's chest tightened. He pointed at the ear again, then mimed pulling something out. Something inside? Hanson's expression crumpled. He nodded again, more urgently this time, and fresh tears spilled over. He touched his ear, pulled his hand away, stared at his fingers. There was nothing visible, no blood, no discharge, but the way he looked at his hand suggested he felt something wrong. Joel had seen plenty in his years working estates. Rich people got sick quietly, hid their problems behind closed doors and NDAs. But this wasn't secrecy. This was a child in pain, and no one was paying attention. He thought about the parade of doctors, the specialists Roman supposedly flew in from around the world. Surely someone had looked. Surely someone had checked for the obvious things, infections, blockages, anything physical. They'd scanned the kid's brain, run genetic tests, tried experimental treatments. They wouldn't have missed something simple. But Hanson was pressing that ear again, wincing, and Joel realized something that made his stomach drop. This wasn't deafness, or it wasn't just deafness. This was suffering. Daily, constant, invisible suffering. And somehow, in a house full of cameras and staff and medical records thicker than phone books, no one had noticed, or no one had cared enough to look past the diagnosis they'd already accepted. Joel stayed there until Hanson's breathing steadied, until the tears stopped. Then he stood, gave the boy a small nod, "I see you," and left. But he couldn't stop thinking about that ear, about what might be inside it, about how long Hanson had been hurting in silence, while everyone around him mistook silence for peace. Joel started carrying an extra microfiber cloth in his pocket, not for the marble or the glass, for the small disasters that followed Hanson like shadows. A knocked-over water glass in the sunroom. Joel wiped it up before anyone saw, caught Hanson's wide-eyed stare, and just shrugged. No fuss, no report filed. The boy watched him leave, something like relief flickering across his face. 2 days later, Hanson dropped a ceramic figurine in the hallway. It shattered into a dozen pieces, and the kid stood there frozen, staring at the shards like they were evidence of a crime. Joel appeared with a dustpan before the boy could panic, swept it all up in silence, and gave Hanson a quick thumbs up. Accidents happen. Hanson's shoulders dropped half an inch. It became a pattern. Joel would find Hanson's puzzles scattered under furniture and reassemble them quietly. When the boy's tablet stylus rolled under a radiator, Joel fished it out and left it on the nearest table without a word. A torn page in a sketchbook got taped back together. An action figure with a loose arm got a drop of superglue and returned to the toy shelf. Good as new. Joel never made a production of it, never waited for acknowledgement. He just fixed things and moved on, the way he always had. But Hanson started showing up wherever Joel was working, not close enough to be intrusive, just present, watching, testing whether this quiet kindness was real or temporary. One afternoon, Joel was repairing a wobbly table leg in the conservatory when Hanson appeared with a wooden toy car. One wheel had come off. The boy held it out tentatively, eyes uncertain, like he wasn't sure whether asking for help was allowed. Joel took it, examined the axle, found the missing wheel wedged behind a planter. 2 minutes with a screwdriver, and the car rolled smooth again. He handed it back. Hanson tested it on the floor, watched it glide in a straight line, and looked up at Joel with something that might have been a smile. It was the first time Joel had seen the kid's face do anything other than flinch or go blank. After that, Hanson sought him out more often. Not for conversation, neither of them tried that, but for proximity. The boy would sit on the floor near wherever Joel was working, drawing or stacking blocks or just existing in the same space. Sometimes he'd touch his ear and wince, and Joel would pause, meet his eyes, offer a look that said, "I know. I see it." Joel never crossed the line, never tried to examine the ear, never suggested medical intervention, never did anything that would get him fired or worse. He stayed in his lane, followed the rules, kept his distance. But trust was building anyway. Wordless, fragile, built on small repairs and the revolutionary act of not punishing a child for being human. And Joel knew, somewhere deep in his gut, that this trust was going to matter. That whatever was wrong with Hanson's ear, whatever the doctors had missed or ignored, it was getting worse. And when it came to a head, Hanson wasn't going to let anyone else near him. Only Joel. The summons came via text at 6:47 a.m., head of staff office, now. Joel had never been called to Mrs. Brennan's office before. In 6 months, he'd been invisible enough to avoid her radar entirely, which was exactly how he liked it. He rinsed his hands, straightened his uniform, and climbed the back stairs with a knot forming in his stomach. Mrs. Brennan sat behind a glass desk that looked like it cost more than Joel's car. She didn't invite him to sit. "Mr. Clark has expressed concerns," she said. No preamble, no warmth. Her fingers were steepled like she was delivering a diagnosis. "About your interactions with his son." Joel's pulse jumped. "I haven't—" "You've been seen." She slid a tablet across the desk. Security footage, timestamps in the corner. Joel watching Hanson in the library. Joel fixing the toy car. Joel crouching near the boy in half a dozen locations, close enough to qualify as contact. "I was just helping." "Helping isn't your job, Mrs." Brennan's voice went cold. "Your job is facilities maintenance. Hanson Clark is not a facility." Joel forced himself to stay calm. "The kid dropped something. I picked it up. That's judgment you're not qualified to make." She pulled the tablet back. "Mr. Clark's son is medically fragile, emotionally vulnerable. He has a team of specialists, therapists, and caregivers who are trained to interact with him. You are not part of that team." "I wasn't trying to—" "What you were trying to do is irrelevant." Mrs. Brennan leaned forward. "Hanson has been hurt by people who claimed to help before. Mr. Clark will not tolerate staff forming attachments, offering advice, or making independent decisions about his son's care. Do you understand?" Joel's jaw tightened. He was crying, in pain. "I didn't think—" "Exactly, you didn't think. You saw a situation above your pay grade and inserted yourself anyway." She stood, signaling the end of the conversation. "Consider this your only warning. If I see you near Hanson again, if you speak to him, touch him, or acknowledge his existence beyond basic safety protocol, you're terminated, effective immediately. No severance, no reference." Joel stared at her. "You're telling me to ignore a kid in pain." "I'm telling you to respect boundaries. Mr. Clark has lost too much already. He will not lose control of his son's care to—" She gestured vaguely at Joel. "Someone who thinks duct tape and good intentions solve everything." The dismissal was clear. Joel turned toward the door, blood roaring in his ears. "And Joel," Mrs. Brennan's voice followed him, "Mr. Clark is watching now. All the cameras in Hanson's spaces are being monitored personally, so whatever misguided hero complex you're nursing, kill it. That boy is not your concern." Joel walked out, down the hall, into the supply closet where no cameras reached. He braced his hands against a shelf and tried to breathe through the fury. He'd been warned off for noticing, for giving a damn, for doing exactly what every adult in this building should have been doing from the start. And now, Roman Clark, billionaire, father, man who'd supposedly moved heaven and earth for his son, was using surveillance and threats to make sure no one got too close. Not to protect Hanson, to protect his own control. Joel's hands curled into fists. He thought about Hanson's tears, the way the boy pressed his ear like he was trying to dig the pain out himself. The silent suffering everyone had decided was just part of the package. He could walk away, keep his job, stay invisible. Or he could do what he'd always done, fix the thing everyone else was too important to notice, even if it cost him everything. Joel found Hanson on the floor of the second-story bathroom, knees pulled up, face contorted in a way that made Joel's chest seize. The boy was rocking slightly, both hands clamped over his right ear, and even from the doorway Joel could see he was sobbing. Silent, desperate, the kind of crying that came from pain too big to contain. Joel glanced at the hallway camera, red light blinking. Roman was watching, or someone was. This was exactly what Mrs. Brennan had warned him about. He should walk away. Call the medical team. Let the professionals handle it. But Hanson looked up, saw Joel, and reached out with one shaking hand. Not for help getting up, for him, for Joel specifically. Joel's feet moved before his brain caught up. He crouched beside the boy, ignoring every rule he'd just been threatened with. Hanson's face was slick with tears, his breathing ragged, and when Joel gently touched his shoulder, the kid grabbed his sleeve like a lifeline. Joel pointed at the ear, eyebrows raised in question. Hanson nodded frantically, then pulled his hand away from his head and tilted toward Joel, offering access, permission, something. The late afternoon sun slanted through the bathroom window at just the right angle. Joel leaned closer, angling Hanson's head slightly toward the light, and looked into the boy's ear canal, and froze. There was something inside, dark, irregular, lodged deep enough that you'd miss it without the right light and the right angle. Not wax, not natural. It looked almost solid, foreign, wrong. Joel's stomach turned. How long had that been there? How many specialists had looked, or claimed to look, and missed it? How many scans had they run while this thing sat inches from the boy's eardrum, pressing, blocking, hurting him every single day? Hanson was watching his face, reading his reaction. The boy's eyes went wide with something like hope. Joel sat back, mind racing. He pulled out his phone, typed quickly. "Need to get that out. Should tell your dad. Get doctor." Hanson read it and immediately shook his head, violent and panicked. He grabbed Joel's phone and typed with clumsy, urgent fingers, "No doctors. They hurt me. They don't listen. They say nothing wrong." Joel stared at the screen. His throat tightened. "They'll help this time. I saw it. Proof." Hanson's response came fast. "They don't believe me. Dad doesn't believe me. You saw it. Please." The kid was trembling now, tears starting fresh. He typed again. "It hurts so bad, all the time. Please make it stop." Joel felt the weight of it settle on his shoulders like concrete. If he called the medical team, they'd sedate Hanson, run tests, maybe find it, maybe not. Roman would have Joel arrested for getting this close, and Hanson, who'd been poked and scanned and dismissed for 8 years, would learn that even the one adult who'd noticed his pain couldn't be trusted. But if Joel tried this himself, no training, no equipment, no legal right, he could damage the kid permanently. Puncture the eardrum, push the obstruction deeper, turn deafness into something worse. Or he could do nothing, walk away, let Hanson suffer until someone else finally decided to pay attention. Joel looked at the boy, 8 years old, in agony, holding Joel's sleeve like it was the only solid thing left in his world. He thought about his toolkit downstairs, tweezers, a small flashlight, steady hands that had fixed 1,000 delicate things. He thought about the cameras, Roman's threats, the legal nightmare waiting if this went wrong. Then he thought about Hanson's silent tears and the way every adult with power and credentials had failed him. Joel typed slowly, "I'll try. But if it doesn't work, we get real doctors. Deal?" Hanson read it, nodded, wiped his face with both hands, and just like that, Joel crossed a line he couldn't uncross. He was either about to save this kid's life or destroy his own. Maybe both. Joel told Hanson to wait in the bathroom and lock the door. He moved through the mansion on autopilot, every nerve ending screaming that this was insane, that he should stop, call someone, do literally anything else. But he didn't. He went to the maintenance closet and pulled his toolkit from the bottom shelf. His hands were steady, muscle memory from years of repairs, but his mind was a hurricane. He grabbed the smallest tweezers he had, the kind with rubberized tips meant for precision electronics work, a penlight with a focused beam, sterile alcohol wipes from the first aid kit, cotton swabs, his phone to record everything just in case he needed proof later that he hadn't hurt the kid, just in case this ended in court. Joel stood there in the closet, tools in hand, and let himself think it through one more time. If he did this and failed, if he pushed the obstruction deeper, if he damaged Hanson's ear, if the boy screamed and Roman came running, Joel would be arrested. Assault on a minor, practicing medicine without a license. Roman had enough money to bury him in legal fees until Joel's grandkids felt it. No job would hire him again. His name would be Mud, his face on the news as the predator who hurt a disabled child. And if he succeeded, if he pulled it out and Hanson heard for the first time, Roman would still destroy him, because Joel had disobeyed a direct order, crossed every boundary, and made Roman look like a fool who'd spent millions while his janitor solved the problem with $10 worth of tools. There was no version of this where Joel walked away clean. He thought about leaving. Right now, packing his locker, getting in his car, disappearing before anyone could tie him to what happened next. Let someone else find Hanson. Let the system do what it should have done 8 years ago. But then he pictured the boy's face, the silent tears, the way Hanson had reached for him, trusted him, begged him with clumsy typed words. Please make it stop. Joel had spent his whole life keeping his head down, staying invisible, fixing things quietly and taking no credit, because credit meant attention, and attention meant risk. He'd convinced himself that was wisdom, survival, but maybe it was just cowardice with better branding. He'd watched injustice before, at other estates, other jobs, and told himself it wasn't his business, that speaking up would cost him more than staying silent. And every time, he'd walked away clean and hated himself a little more. Not this time. Joel exhaled slowly, tucked the tools into his pockets, and headed back upstairs. His heart hammered, his mouth was dry. Every instinct told him to turn around, but doing nothing was its own crime, and he was done being complicit in a child's suffering just because the people in charge had decided suffering was acceptable. When he reached the bathroom door, he knocked softly. Hanson opened it immediately, eyes red but hopeful. The boy stepped aside to let him in, then locked the door behind them. Joel set his tools on the counter and looked at Hanson. Really looked. 8 years old, born into money and privilege and every advantage except the one that mattered. Someone willing to see him as more than a diagnosis. Joel knelt so they were eye level. He held up the tweezers, the light, showed Hanson each tool slowly. The boy nodded, understanding. Then Joel typed on his phone, "This might hurt. If it's too much, you tell me stop." "Okay?" Hanson read it, nodded again, then typed back, "I trust you." 3 words, devastating in their simplicity. Joel swallowed hard, turned on the penlight, positioned Hanson near the window for extra brightness, and prayed he wasn't about to ruin both their lives. Joel angled the penlight into Hanson's ear canal, and the obstruction came into sharp focus. Dark, compacted, deeper than he'd hoped, It looked almost like hardened wax fused with something else. Fabric fibers, maybe dirt, he couldn't tell. Whatever it was, it had been there long enough to calcify into a mass that pressed against everything it touched. No wonder the kid was in agony. Joel steadied his hand and guided the tweezers in slowly, millimeter by millimeter. Hanson's breathing hitched, but he stayed still, fingers gripping the edge of the sink. The tweezers touched the mass. Joel adjusted the angle, trying to find purchase without pushing it deeper. There, he felt the tips catch on something solid. He exhaled slowly and began to pull. Gentle, steady pressure, no sudden movements. The mass shifted. Hanson flinched, but didn't pull away. Joel kept going, angling the tweezers slightly upward to follow the curve of the canal. It was coming, slowly, resisting. Then, all at once, it released. Joel pulled the tweezers free, and clamped between the rubber tips was something grotesque, a dark twisted plug of compacted wax, dirt, and what looked like a tiny fragment of cloth. All fused together into a shape that had probably been growing for years. A thin streak of blood followed it, seeping from where the mass had been pressed against raw tissue. Hanson gasped, not a silent, learned gasp, a real one, audible, sharp. The boy's eyes went huge. He turned his head slightly, and Joel saw the exact moment it happened, the moment sound entered Hanson's world for the first time. The hum of the ventilation system, the distant murmur of water in the pipes, Joel's own breathing. Hanson's hand flew to his ear, not in pain this time, but in shock. His mouth opened. He made a noise, small, experimental, stunned, and then his face crumpled with something too big to name. Joel's throat closed. He reached for a cotton swab to clean the blood, hands shaking now that it was over. That's when the door exploded inward. Roman Clark filled the doorway, face twisted with fury and panic. His eyes locked onto Joel, kneeling beside his son, tweezers in one hand, blood on a cotton swab in the other, Hanson's ear red and weeping fluid. "Get away from him!" Roman lunged forward and shoved Joel back hard enough that he slammed into the bathtub. The tweezers and the mass went flying. Roman scooped Hanson up like the boy weighed nothing, his hands frantically checking for injuries, his voice rising into something raw and terrible. "What did you do? What did you do to him?" Hanson was trying to sign something, trying to get his father's attention, but Roman wasn't looking. He was staring at Joel like he'd walked in on a murder. "Security now!" Roman's voice cracked. He pulled Hanson tighter, and the boy winced, not from pain, but from being crushed. "Call the police! Get this man out of my house!" Joel tried to speak, tried to explain, but Roman was already shouting over him. "You touched my son! I warned you! I warned all of you!" Footsteps thundered up the stairs. 2 security guards appeared, and Roman pointed at Joel like he was radioactive. "Detain him! Don't let him leave! I want him arrested for assault." The guards moved in. Joel raised his hand, still holding the bloody cotton swab, and tried one more time. "Mr. Clark, listen." There was something in his ear. "I don't care what excuse you invented." Roman's face was scarlet, veins standing out on his neck. "You had no right, no authority. He's bleeding." Hanson was struggling now, trying to push away from his father, trying to get his hands free to sign. But Roman was too far gone, too consumed by terror and rage. One of the guards grabbed Joel's arm, twisted it behind his back. The other kicked the tweezers away like they were evidence. "Mr. Clark," Joel said, voice tight with pain and desperation. "He can hear. Look at him. He reacted to sound." But Roman wasn't listening. He was rocking Hanson, murmuring frantic reassurances, and all Joel could see was the boy's face over his father's shoulder. Eyes wide, mouth moving, desperately trying to tell someone, anyone, what had just happened. That he'd heard his father's voice for the first time. And no one was paying attention. The Clark Estate's private clinic had never been this loud. Machines beeped, nurses called for charts, a specialist muttered into a recorder, listing observations in clipped clinical phrases that made Roman's stomach churn. He stood in the corner of the exam room with his arms crossed too tightly, watching Hanson through the glass. The boy sat on the edge of the bed, feet swinging, head turning toward every unexpected sound like the world had become a fireworks show only he could see. "Again," the audiologist said, speaking into the mic. "Raise your hand when you hear the tone." A soft chime played through the headphones on Hanson's ears. His hand shot up instantly. Roman's vision blurred. The tests went on. Different frequencies, different volumes, word recognition, directional sound. Every time Hanson responded imperfectly, sometimes too slow, sometimes startled. But he responded. When it was over, the specialist came in with a tablet and a face that looked both cautious and furious. "Mr. Clark," she said, "your son has functional hearing in his right ear. Some minor residual trauma we can treat, but the obstruction was the primary issue. It's gone. His brain is responding normally to auditory stimuli." Roman swallowed. "Obstruction?" She tapped the screen, bringing up an image, an old scan, grainy and shaded. "This MRI is from 4 years ago. The technicians flagged an anomaly in the canal. You were advised to follow up with an ENT specialist." She flicked to another screen, an email trail, highlighted notes, a recommendation report. "You did," she continued tightly. "The ENT ordered a scope, noted possible foreign body, cannot rule out, and recommended removal under general anesthesia." Roman stared. "I don't remember." "You were also advised," she said, voice sharpening, "that the procedure wasn't covered by your chosen trial program, that it would be out of pocket." The focus at that time shifted to experimental neurological treatments. She swiped again. More records, more signatures, all with his name at the bottom. "You were given this information repeatedly," she said. "The system nudged you toward more expensive options, research partnerships, media-friendly miracle cures. But the problem, at least in one ear, was mechanical, visible, fixable." The room tilted. Roman gripped the back of a chair. "Are you telling me," he rasped, "that my son lived like this for years because no one actually removed it?" "I'm telling you," she replied, "someone finally did what should have been done a long time ago. And it wasn't any of us." The words landed like a verdict. Later in the study, Mrs. Brennan laid out the security footage on a large screen. Roman watched Joel enter the bathroom, watched Hanson reach for him, watched the careful preparation, the penlight, the steadiness of Joel's hands, watched the dark mass come free, watched his own entrance, rage, shove, accusations. Then the audio overlay, the moment Hanson gasped, the small shocked sound he made, the first sound he'd ever made that wasn't swallowed by silence. Roman had to sit down. "Legal is recommending we press charges," Mrs. Brennan said softly. "We have grounds. Boundaries were crossed. Liability—" "Stop!" Roman's voice came out hoarse. "Turn it off." The screen went black. The house felt different now. Every quiet corner suddenly suspect, every muted surface an accomplice. Roman thought of all the times he'd prided himself on the silence, called it compassion, called it sanctuary. It had been a smokescreen. A way to control what he couldn't fix, a way to avoid the possibility that he had failed. "Where is he?" Roman asked. "Security is holding him in the side office waiting for your decision." Roman stood. His legs felt unsteady, like they belonged to someone older, someone weaker. "Bring him to the south terrace, no cameras." Joel arrived flanked by 2 guards, wrists free but posture tense, like he was bracing for impact. Roman dismissed the guards with a gesture and waited until they were alone. The city spread out below them in glittering silence. "You disobeyed me," Roman said at last. "Yes, sir," Joel replied. "I did." "You touched my son." "Yes." "You risked his hearing, his life, your job, prison." "Yes." Joel's jaw tightened. "Because he was in pain, and no one was listening." The words hung there heavier than any accusation. Roman thought of the emails, the ignored recommendations, the signed forms, the way he'd thrown money at the most complex, glamorous solutions because humility, the possibility that he'd overlooked something simple, felt unbearable. "Why didn't you call a doctor?" Roman asked. "I tried," Joel said quietly. "Hanson begged me not to, said they didn't believe him, said they said nothing was wrong. You told us to stay away, to trust the experts. The experts failed him." "Sir." Roman flinched. The title sounded wrong, like it belonged to someone who deserved respect. "You shouldn't have been the one," Roman said. "A janitor should not have been the one to—" "Then someone else should have done it," Joel cut in, before he could stop himself. "Someone with letters after their name, someone you listened to, but they didn't. For 8 years, they didn't." The silence that followed was different from the house's curated quiet. This one was human, raw, cracked open. Roman exhaled. The doctors confirmed it was there. For years, they recommended removal. I chose other paths." Joel's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes cooled. "So what happens now?" he asked. "You press charges? Make an example out of the guy who pulled the thing out?" Roman looked at him, the man he'd reduced to background noise, the man he'd just watched save his son on a grainy screen. "No," Roman said. The word surprised even him. "No, Mr. Smith, I don't press charges." Joel blinked. "I clear your name," Roman continued, "publicly, if necessary. I sign whatever I have to sign to make sure no one ever questions that you saved my son's hearing. And then I decide whether I deserve to ask you to stay." Joel stared at him. "You're asking me to keep working here?" "I'm asking," Roman said slowly, "if the man who listened when I wouldn't is willing to stay in my house. On his terms, not mine." For a moment, Joel said nothing. Behind them, the terrace doors opened. Faintly, Hanson's voice, ragged, halting but unmistakably sound, spilled into the space. He was in the hallway with a therapist, practicing simple words, laughing at the strange feel of his own voice. Roman's throat tightened. "I don't know about terms yet," Joel said at last, "but I'm not walking away from that kid, not now that he knows what hearing you sounds like." Roman turned. Through the glass, he saw Hanson catch sight of him. The boy's face lit up, and he said something. Roman couldn't hear it through the door. Couldn't read his lips from here, but the therapist beamed. "He said Dad," Joel murmured. "First time. He's been working on it." Roman's knees nearly gave out. Later, the house changed. The grandfather clock's chimes were turned back on. Music drifted faintly from the kitchen. Staff spoke in normal voices, laughter occasionally bouncing off the once sacred walls. Hanson wore a small hearing aid in his right ear, while his left awaited further treatment. He followed sound like a trail of breadcrumbs. Birdsong, dish clatter, the low rumble of his father's voice. Roman listened more than he spoke now. To doctors who explained in painstaking detail how fear and pride had blinded him. To lawyers who outlined settlements and reform plans for the clinics that had ignored the obvious. To staff who finally felt safe mentioning what they saw. Most of all, he listened to his son. Hanson's words were clumsy at first, vowels soft, consonants uncertain. But every attempt was a miracle Roman refused to take for granted. They sat together in rooms that were no longer mausoleums of quiet, but laboratories of sound. A fan whirring, pages turning, Joel's low voice explaining how a generator worked, while Hanson peppered him with questions. One afternoon, Hanson sat between them on the floor of the conservatory, lining up toy cars. "Dad," he said, carefully shaping the word, "Joel, fix my ear." Roman's chest hurt. "He did," he said. "He did what I should have made sure someone did a long time ago." Hanson considered that, then reached out and took both their hands, one small, two larger, all calloused in different ways. "I hear you now," he said, the sentence imperfect but beautiful. "Don't stop talking." Roman met Joel's eyes over the boy's head. In that look was apology, gratitude, and the humiliation of a man who'd learned the hardest truth of his life. All his power, all his money, all his control had failed his son, while the man paid to remain invisible had done what he would not. "Then we won't," Roman said softly. "Not ever again.